everyone. I am Marcia McGraw-Olive, a new advisory board member of the Caspian Policy Center, and I am thrilled to host this panel and to moderate such great experts on a topic that is been mentioned by almost every speaker here this morning. It will come as no surprise to you here in the room that the geopolitical environment is upending geoeconomic space in the Trans-Caspian region. But what is surprising, I think, is how regional leaders are responding to it. I just recently came back from a visit to the region, and it was as though you were hearing one voice. As one person put it, the necessity to diversify is the bottom line lesson of the current war in Ukraine, and it will remain so. You don't go back to the past. This is a vision that you would hear throughout my visit. Now, implementing this vision will bring significant benefits to the people of Central Asia, but that will require implementation. So it's how do you make those benefits sustainable? And so diversification is part of the answer because it enables trade to be happening within this region and not just to be a transit zone. The middle corridor, however, is not a new idea. It's been around for about a decade. The Georgian, Azeri, and Kazakhstan railways came up with this idea, and they developed a committee to create the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route. But again, the implementation is where we are going to have to intensify our interests and actions. So in order to provide diversity on this topic of diversification, we have assembled a panel that includes two government representatives from the United States and the EU, an academic perspective, and as well as an operational one from the Baku port. So I'm pleased to introduce first Michael Schiffer. He is the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia at USAID. From 2012 to 22, he was the Senior Advisor and Counselor on the Democratic staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. From 2009 to 2012, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. He has his undergraduate degree from a local school, Georgetown, and graduate degrees from the London School of Economics and New York University. Dr. Dagmara Koska has a very wide portfolio. She manages as the Deputy Head of Global Issues and Innovation Section, which includes the following: climate, energy, environment, maritime affairs, transport research and innovation, and health policies. She oversees climate and energy policies for the EU here, delegation, and she works on EU-US relations and projects in these areas that are aiming at deepening transatlantic ties, such as expert exchanges and other conferences. She is a German lawyer specializing in German and international competition and energy law. We also have, on my left, Dr. Nathan Hudson, who is the Assistant Professor of Urban Planning at the University of North Texas, and he's been a consultant for many years for the World Bank. He has 15 years of rail and maritime planning experience. His most recent research relates to the impact of the invasion of Ukraine on the Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia. He has a PhD in urban planning and development from the University of Southern California and a master's in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies from the University of Texas at Austin. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Eugene See, who has over 25 years of experience in the port logistics area, including in major ports in Singapore. He's currently the Chief Operating Officer of the Baku International Seaport. And he takes a lead in infrastructure planning, systems development, and he has numerous hats that he wears in order to speed the development of the middle corridor. So with this terrific panel, may I introduce first Mr. Schiffer for your remarks.
Great. Well, thank you, Marcia, and my thanks to the CPC for hosting us here this morning for this conversation. As most of you know, Central Asia sits at the convergence of four of the planet's great geostrategic and geoeconomic tectonic plates, bounded by Russia, the People's Republic of China, Afghanistan, and Iran. As we approach the quarter-way mark of this now not-so-new century, one thing is very clear. In Central Asia, as elsewhere, these plates are moving as we enter a new era of strategic competition, with new fissures, earthquakes, and subduction zones driving new thinking in the region about how to build and sustain a stable, peaceful, and prosperous future. And as a new Central Asia emerges, the United States finds that it has new opportunities for engagement and partnership in the region. Indeed, our work, especially at USAID, is emerging as a proof point that development principles grounded in pluralistic values, good governance, and economic inclusion can deliver greater resilience, diversified economies, sustainable trade-driven growth, and employment. As the region grows more open to reform, we at USAID are asking hard questions about how to unlock the region's economic growth potential, including about the proverbial middle corridor, a trade route echoing the ancient Silk Road and linking Central Asia and the Caspian to Europe and global markets. Advocates believe that a strengthened middle corridor can breathe new life into the region's economy, promoting cross-border trade and generating new opportunities for direct investment and improved livelihoods. In order to succeed, however, local and national leaders will have to work together to tackle daunting administrative, infrastructure, and political obstacles to growth. The region is vast and has equally vast infrastructure needs. Human capital is distributed sparsely. The region's leaders are only now collaborating with one another on account of simmering tensions that date back to independence from the Soviet Union, and indeed further back still. Despite all these constraints, however, we believe there is reason to be very optimistic. USAID's partnerships in Central Asia and the Caucasus run deep, spanning more than 30 years, during which time the United States has provided more than $21 billion to support the region's peace and security objectives, humanitarian priorities, and economic growth. In the last 2 years alone, the United States has provided over $115 million of congressional Ukraine supplemental funding to the Caucasus and to Central Asia to mitigate the impacts of Russia's further illegal invasion of Ukraine. Now we have a historic opportunity to continue supporting the region's economic development through increased trade and greater trade integration. With many leaders demonstrating an increased appetite for reform, we're adopting a more robust approach to the region's economic development goals. Our programs are designed to carefully facilitate greater trade and cross-border collaboration, with an eye increasingly trained on the middle corridor. Our first priority is to help the countries in Central Asia and the Caucasus reduce barriers to connectivity, both physical and digital. Nearly half the population of Central Asia is not digitally connected, and slow internet speeds for those who are connected impede business and slows efficiency. As such, USAID is conducting digital ecosystem assessments to formulate an approach to supporting the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs in the region who will catalyze growth. We are also fully supporting private sector engagement with digital markets. Our Future Growth Initiative actively partnered with the International Trade Center to create eBay Central Asia Hub, which has trained 131 companies from Central Asia so far to set up their online stores on the hub. But let's be clear. Effective connectivity for all will require billions of dollars in public and private investment, openness to modernization, and improvements to regulatory frameworks in line with international best practices. As the middle corridor gains popularity, however, it is becoming prone to bottlenecks and delays. We are using this opportunity and the moment we have right now to gauge how current demand may be sustained and what might be done to unleash its potential. At present, USAID supports the region's private sector through the harmonization of customs and border procedures, increased public sector dialogue, and firm-to-firm connectivity. A prime example is USAID's Trade Central Asia program, which received an additional $15 million in Ukraine supplemental funds to, again, mitigate the trade impacts of Russia's further illegal invasion of Ukraine. Trade Central Asia is working to digitize key infrastructure from Central Asia to the Caspian, supporting the electronic exchange of customs information, permitting, and queuing, and creating a system for trucks by doing so at border crossings. Lastly, we are also advocating and looking at ways to support greater interregional cooperation among Central Asia and Caucasus countries. The countries of the region have proudly sought to maintain their hard-won independence from the Soviet Union, sometimes eschewing strong intra-regional cooperation in the process. USAID supports the economic sovereignty of the Caucasus and Central Asian countries and is working to bring together trade and transit officials, shippers and facilitators, and others in a whole-of-region approach. Our Trade Central Asia activity is supporting this kind of cooperation by, for example, helping Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan introduce maritime single windows to improve ease of doing cross-border businesses. Ultimately, our hope is that the international investors who are looking at the region and considering whether or not they should be doing business there will view Central Asia and the Caucasus as a market of 90 million consumers, well-connected internally and able to attract greater foreign direct investment. USAID has a number of programs working to promote economic growth in the Caspian region, and we are working to secure new assistance funding to further this important work. We will continue to stand firmly in friendship with the people of Central Asia and the Caucasus as they chart their own paths forward. And we look forward to continuing our work in the region in partnership with the countries of Central Asia and the Caucasus to unleash their formidable possibilities for regional connectivity and to create a more prosperous, stable, and sovereign future. So let me conclude by thanking the CPC again for bringing together this conversation and to thank all of the ambassadors and others who have joined us today and contributed to such a rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent outlining of the areas that we can focus on to sustain this demand, and we will talk about this in more detail. Thank you for laying that out. Now, Dr. Koska.
Thank you, Marcia, and I'm delighted to be here with you because it seems that the European Union wasn't represented in any of the 6 previous fora, so I'm delighted to be the first EU representative to speak to you today, and I'm thrilled about this dialogue, and I'm thrilled about the messages already passed by the ambassadors and my fellow colleagues from the US administration. I would like to start with the premise that the Caspian region's vast natural resources have really started to redefine the strategic energy relations between the European Union member states, and the rest of the world. The opportunity for that to happen became evident, I think, 2 decades ago with the ideas triggered by energy crises in the European Union, 2003, 2009. Back then, 2 decades ago, the idea of the Southern Gas Corridor became salient. And indeed, that was the first large-scale project to diversify energy resources to the Southeast partners of this region in the European Union. This perspective and this cooperation and opportunity is today even more relevant than ever. Of course, Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine has accelerated these trends, has allowed us to redefine our connections and our partnerships with the rest of the world, and really triggered a lot of thinking about what the future holds for European partnerships and European resilience. Of course, the climate crisis is today more evident than ever as well, and that holds a promise as well for the European Union, but also obviously for Central Asia and the rest of the globe to work together to accelerate the transition towards climate neutrality. I'd like to say that, of course, in a multipolar world, the cooperation along the Trans-Caspian corridor is not only important from the energy security perspective, but what also has been said by the previous speakers, for the prosperity, for peace, for democracy, for the region and beyond. Because the Trans-Caspian has the potential to bring Asia, Europe, and the Middle East together. And in particular, its people, for more people-to-people exchanges, something that is extremely important for the vibrancy of our democracies. The region is an indispensable partner for the European Union. Its relevance is indeed multifaceted, as already said by Michael. Energy, but also digitalization, transportation, trade, and political ties. I think all these areas are key for our relations. Today, of course, and I focus more specifically on climate and energy, I would like to say that the energy ties, which are most pronounced between Europe and this region, could serve as a blueprint for other areas as well. So on energy, this region has played a critical role geopolitically for the European Union already. And indeed, the previous speakers have stressed the importance of TANAP and TAP, the two large-scale infrastructure projects that ran from Azerbaijan to Europe across multiple states, Turkey in particular, but also Albania and landing in Italy. Today, of course, Europe looks at this region and also at our partnership, as I already said, from a different perspective. We've realized through Russian aggression in Ukraine that Europe is much too much dependent on cheap energy supplies, fossil fuel supplies from Russia. And indeed, that has triggered rethinking in terms of where our energy ties should lie in the future. That strategy is supported by the highest levels of the European Union, by the leaders, and it's called Repower EU. Its goal is definitely to cut our dependence on Russian fossil fuels by, at the latest, 2027. But also, in doing so, we would like to accelerate the transition. We would like to turn this challenge into an opportunity and, of course, build resilience, looking forward to our challenges to transition away from fossil fuels with view to our climate neutrality goals. So how do we want to do it? Well, through energy savings. That's our first pillar of work, very important also for the region, which I will speak a little bit more about. Secondly, of course, through renewing the energies that we consume in Europe, so more development of renewable energies. And thirdly, diversification, new partnerships in particular. And on all these fronts, already the region is playing a key role. So it has been mentioned that we have a joint objective of doubling the capacity of the Southern Gas Corridor to up to 20 BCM by 2027. And very recent dialogues, just 3 weeks ago, that European Commissioner for Energy Simpson held in Brussels with her Azerbaijani colleague, Minister Shahbazov. That showed also that we are actually looking to even increasing more beyond those 20 BCM in the 2029 perspective. Then I would like to mention the MOUs, the strategic partnership also with Kazakhstan on the development of critical raw materials. I think Laura Lockman has mentioned the critical raw materials and its importance in developing our joint efforts on the road towards climate neutrality. And the acceleration of energy transition overall. This is the third pillar that I mentioned before, and here our partnerships in the region are geared towards developments of renewable energies, development of energy efficiency technologies and deployment of those technologies, but also integration of renewable energies in the region. Methane emission reductions, very critical, and because it's a really low-hanging fruit. And then last but not least, also hydrogen. European Union has a very strategic objective on hydrogen. We want to produce 10 million tons of hydrogen, green hydrogen in the European Union, but this is also as much as we want to import from the rest of the world. And of course, the Central Asia is the closest geographical area to the European Union, in addition, obviously, to Northern Mediterranean region. And so these regions are critical for us to fulfill that objective of 10 million tons of green hydrogen. The green energy corridor has been mentioned. The electric link between Azerbaijan, Romania, and Hungary. Of course, Bulgaria is also critically involved in thinking and joining potentially this project. And from the European Union, Commission, this project will be supported politically, and already those statements have been made. So let me finish my introductory remarks with an outlook. So we see also an important potential for LNG trade, in particular with Turkey, and in supporting the Southeast Europe. We see an important development around the idea of a solidarity ring. MOU was just signed in Sofia with a number of countries in the region. And third, but not last, I would like to mention the potential of the region to contribute to the integration of Western Balkans. This is critical because the Western Balkans are also most of the countries' accession candidates to the European Union. So that is a critical role and that this region can play. So development of markets in Southeastern Europe is really an important imperative. Last but not least, of course, towards Moldova and Ukraine that face critical challenges in terms of LNG supplies, this region can be important going forward as well. And with that, my introductory remarks, I pass over back to you, Marcia.
Thank you, Dagmara. And talking about sustaining demand, that was a very good overview of the areas of potential development. Thank you. Now I turn to Dr. Nathan Hudson. I'm going to go on a first name basis now. Nathan, I look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to the CPC, Ambassador Hoagland, others. So I want to start by talking, why is the middle corridor more important than its current cargo profile exists? Clearly, if we look at the amount of tonnage or TEUs that are handled by the middle corridor currently, it's relatively modest if we look in comparison to major ports. And that will likely continue for some period of time. But the middle corridor's role is far beyond commerce. Middle corridor is, of course, important for global commerce, but it's really essential for Eurasian integration, and particularly the integration of Central Asia with the Caucasus. Because for a long time, the Caspian has been seen as a functional barrier that has held down trade between Central Asia and the Caucasus. And this must be the priority, is to make sure that this is no longer a functional barrier. With the right investments, trans-Caspian commerce can be comparatively one of the smoothest components of the middle corridor compared to some of the overland components. And it will help link the Central Asia and the Caucasus to unify their economic base. Also, the trade across the Caspian itself can be one of the most environmentally friendly aspects of the corridor, because as we know, maritime shipping is the most efficient way of moving goods. And so with new engine technologies, this could be an almost zero-emission component of the middle corridor. So I would say that coordination, clearly, with so many countries and parties involved, is definitely a challenge. But I'd suggest that overcoming this challenge will bring positive externalities in other areas. So what are the current priorities and investment needs of the middle corridor and the Black Sea routes? So one, enhancing trade between Central Asia and the Caucasus, and Central and Asia and Europe is more critical right now, I would say, than China to Europe. So the middle corridor can't necessarily be all things for all people. It will have a role for China to Europe trade, but I think its most essential function is for Central Asia to the Caucasus. And it needs to prioritize routes and commodities that will make sense whether or not the northern corridor is open. By northern corridor, we're referring again to the route that runs through Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, that is now a very precarious route due to the sanctions. We need to find markets that would still make sense even if this route in the future goes back to functioning normally. We also need to think about not just containers. Typically, when you see articles in the news, they're only talking about containers. But containerization in Central Asia is still not fully developed, and we need to think about bulk cargo as well. We need to think of energy, we need to think of steel, other biofuels, other fuels that could potentially fuel the market. I'd also argue that Middle Corridor will emerge as a potential corridor for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Ukraine, after the war ends, will need tremendous supplies of steel, of construction materials, of glass, of everything. And one of the major sources for a lot of these raw materials will be Central Asia. So using the Middle Corridor for the direct reconstruction of Ukraine becomes incredibly important. At the moment, we have deficiencies both of port capacity, vessel capacity, rail infrastructure, bottlenecks at border crossings. We also have a deficit of soft infrastructure when it comes to digitalization. And in some ways, the deficits on the Black Sea are more significant than on the Caspian, not because you can't get vessels into the Black Sea, but because the vessels that are being used currently are relatively old and inefficient. And that drives up the costs, the operational costs. So if we look at specific modernization, Port of Aktau is modernizing. It's trying to significantly bolster its container handling capacity up to 200,000 TEU by 2025. This is still relatively small. Point of comparison here, Port of Baltimore is over 1 million TEU, so it would still be a modest-sized port. Turkmenbashi is also, in Turkmenistan, has a critical role in this as well. Turkmenistan is right now prioritizing a lot of RoRo, roll-on, roll-off shipments. And so they're bolstering their trade with the Port of Alat, which Eugene will speak about as well. And so that's another major component, because if you're only reliant on one port, if it's Aktau, and sometimes there's weather in Aktau and lack of reliability, so having a second port in Turkmenbashi, I think, would be critical in keeping the corridor open. There's also a need for digitalization. There have been several parallel efforts to digitalize the corridor. And digitalization is very, very important for a number of reasons. One, because you need to know where your cargo is. And second, you need to be able to communicate amongst different parties. The more parties you have involved, the more important communication is. So the World Bank is trying to come up with a connector that would integrate the various digitalization efforts that are being undertaken by Transeca, by Kazakh Railways, by ADY Container in Baku. So they're trying to follow IDSA standards to make the data very secure and private, that would allow queries to occur without requiring full data sharing. Digitalization means more efficient use of currently limited infrastructure and equipment, and that can allow the system to account for uncertainty, whether that uncertainty is natural, like weather or ice or wind, or artificial, and it would allow trust to be built between different countries and shippers and providers. So you have greater transparency on rates, so you know what a container should cost, and you'll be able to understand whether or not the constraint is artificial or natural. And so for critical supply chains, for auto parts, for high-value goods, this is even more essential, because if we're moving from low-value commodities to higher-value, value-added goods, then we need those supply chains to be working even more efficiently. Another issue we need to think about is water loss from the Caspian, falling sea levels, because again, we're told we don't want the Caspian to go the way of the Aral Sea. And this is important, of course, existentially. It's also very important for commerce. So there's a threat from Volga outflows, which is being driven by higher evaporation from climate change. There's also desalination. Several of the countries around the Caspian are pursuing a desalination policy due to water shortages. Several of the countries are very severely water stressed. They're looking at desalination. Well, this is another way in which water is being withdrawn, and it also impacts the salinity level, which of course impacts fishing and other threats. So, for example, the Port of Aktau is very concerned about falling water levels. The Port of Aktau was modernized in Kazakhstan in the mid-1990s, and that was at a time when the Caspian Sea was kind of at a historical high due to just unusually high rainfall for several prior years. the Caspian sea level has been falling almost since that point, and so we need to definitely think about coordinating that effort. So like the middle corridor, we need to have active coordination amongst the parties in the Caspian to manage the water level so you don't literally kind of create a race to the bottom. So concluding points, we're in DC, so to paraphrase John Kennedy, the reason for doing the middle corridor is not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? It's a difficult thing to do. It's not, if you were a logistics person, it would be scary because there's so many parties, so many things to go through. But by doing that, if we are able to crack that nut, basically, if we're able to effectively develop it, that would require both unprecedented coordination, but it would allow for interesting possibilities for other types of coordination that might be even more difficult, like the environmental challenges that would require not only, of course, the coordination between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, but also require, at some level, buy-in by Russia and Iran. So it would create a framework for addressing other issues of common concern, including those in the environmental sphere. So I'll go and stop there and turn it back to Marcia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that will certainly wake us all up as to the challenges that we face, while at the same time offering a very interesting vision of this regional economic integration and also support on a climatic level and for the recovery of Ukraine. So very interesting. All right, now we'll get the last real operational expertise here from the guy on the ground.
Thank you.
Eugene.
The last speaker usually summarizes all the key points of the previous three speakers, so I'll try to do that and put a practical aspect to it. February 20, 2022, Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and 2 or 3 months later, the port of Baku was filled with containers. Every single square meter, we were filled up with containers. At one point, we were handling about 5,000 containers. That was our peak. We could not handle anymore. So what does this tell us? We need to look at the middle corridor, not from the port's perspective from which I'm working. I learned that lesson. We need to look at it from the perspective of a system. There are 4 components that needs to be addressed in defining the efficiency and capacity of the middle corridor. The first component is your railway infrastructure, your railway network, your equipment used to move the gauges, because gauges in China and Turkey are smaller than the gauges used in the post-Soviet countries in Caucasus, Asia. The first development of railway infrastructure started 25 years ago, in 2011. Altinko Korgos created the stations for moving the gauge so that the wagons can be used in Kazakhstan from China. So you need to move it from a smaller gauge to a bigger gauge using rail-mounted cranes by lifting the wagons up. The second key infrastructure development started in Kazakhstan in 2014. That's the Trans-Kazakhstan Railway Network, which reduces the distance between the borders of Korgos, Altinko, to Aktau by 1,000 kilometers. So the puzzles are coming together again. And what's next? We had the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This disrupted the road networks to Turkey from the Caucasus. So what did we do? We created or implemented the Baku-Tbilisi cars. And that comes with the Altinko station, Akahalaki station, which performed the same role as Altinko Korgos, moving the rail gauge again. Because in Turkey, as I mentioned, it's a smaller gauge. So all this you can see infrastructure-wise, there are capacity issues. If your gauge changing capacities are not there, that becomes a critical bottleneck, whether it is Altinco or whether it is Korgos. When the flood of containers came in from the northern corridor, there were few factors affecting that flow. Firstly, we were coming after COVID. The Maritime Silk Road was jammed. Rates were high. Rates were so high that it equaled the rates of moving containers from Korgos to Turkey. Over 10,000 US dollars, which equal to the rates of EU's sea maritime routes. So that was to our favor. We were very happy. We were flooded with containers. Right? But could we handle it? You heard from our distinguished audience this morning of all the ongoing infrastructure developments in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, supplementing the railway infrastructure. When you supplement the railway infrastructure, your capacity does not increase because there were still key bottlenecks that were not addressed. We should come away from this forum recognizing the need for intelligent, pointed investments in key bottlenecks that will address the capacity issue. First, we need to increase the speed for which we change the wagons. We need to increase the capacity. Why we say this? In 2021, 1.41 million containers were transversed across the northern corridor. And we say we want to handle 1.41 million. We cannot even handle 5% of that, which amounts to around 70,000 TEUs. So does the middle corridor become alternative? Gentlemen, what alternative if you handle only 70,000 TEUs out of 1.5 million? There's no alternative. You still go back to your old ways unless we identify the key issues in our critical infrastructure. Increase the efficiency at the key borders of changing gauge. Better equipment in Akaraki, lengthening the rails, two rail in, 2 rails out now. But each rail is 160 meters. Not much you can do. At that point in time when this infrastructure was built, it was enough. But now we look forward. And once we look forward, we address the issue. In fact, the Russian-Ukraine conflict did us a favor. It stress tests the system, and the bottlenecks were very clear to us. There was a transit council formed by the Azerbaijan government to look at these key issues. We visited Akaraki, we visited Georgian railways. We wanted to see what were the bottlenecks. Right? So this is component 1. Component 2, because the middle corridor spans across the Caspian Sea, ports are involved. Handling capacities of ports are involved. All the ports along the middle corridor have to be aligned in terms of capacity. One of the biggest capacities now along the middle corridor is Georgian, which has capacity of 550,000 TEUs. Georgian port, Porty. Right? Then it comes to us. Port of Alat, 100,000 TEUs. And we have Aktau, similar, 100,000 TEUs. And we have Turkmenbashi, 700,000 TEUs. In Azerbaijan, we recognize this. So we started planning now, and we are developing phase 2, which will increase our capacity to 650,000 TEUs, making it align with Georgia, Turkmenbashi. ACTAO recognizes this too, and they're working closely with key investors, I think. I will not say so much because I'm not with the Kazakh government, but I think they're working with key companies like PSA. Samuk Invest is there also to look into increasing the capacity of Kurik and ACTAO. Good. All moving in the right direction. So what's left next? Turkey. Do you think your containers can get across to Europe easily? Now? How? Is there a dedicated high-speed line for freight connecting cargoes to all the way, let's say, across Europe to London, to Spain, Madrid, to Duisburg? In the Northern Corridor, there's a line under one system. So your container goes from Kazakhstan across the Northern Red Wake to Belarus, Poland, Duisburg, and you can know exactly when it arrives. But for the Middle Corridor, is it the same? Man, sometimes you don't know when a container will arrive. Really? I mean, I'm sorry to hear this. This is the reality check for us. We have to come out from here realizing what we need to do. Yes, the first part, we know, potential represents opportunities. Opportunities represents us to realize the challenges, to overcome them. Turkey needs to come with a picture addressing with Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and later maybe Turkmenistan to address this collectively in a trading bloc, I don't know what you call it, similar to what we do where I came from in Singapore, ASEAN, to create a unified rail network system, electrified, high-speed, sustainable, less carbon emissions. All the way from point cargoes, which development started 25 years ago, all the way to Europe. Is China ready to move cargo to the Middle Corridor? They are. Their port, Lianglanquang, is in a very strategic position. They are in the Yangtze River economic delta, together with a nearby regions of Beijing, which has a huge import cluster, which means that you can serve this two-way. You can export, and they are ready to import. Their middle income is growing. The opportunities are there. Everybody is correct in saying that there are opportunities. Everybody incorrect in saying there are potential. But we have to realize this with a pointed strategy. No more macro outlook. Yes, we're going to do this and this within 15 days. Tell me one shipment that comes within 15 days in the last 3 months. Tell me. There are none. Not one. Now, in this forum, we are talking now, Turkey is one side. We have the Marmara Tunnel. Yes, we go in the Marmara Tunnel, we use it. But can we use it 24/7? No. So there's a capacity restraint there. There are good things being done, but on a certain level, we need to enhance it. Enhance it collectively, strategically, tactically, and in a planned, coordinated fashion, with all the governments in the region looking at the same issues at the same time. And there's one more component left. We talk about Black Sea connectivity. Let me ask the forum, where are the vessels to connect Poti to Constanza, to Chornomorsk in Ukraine, or to Bodgans? Where are the ferry vessels? They are ferry vessels, 30 years old, 40 years old. Are they cheap? No, they are expensive. So where's the competitive advantage of using that? None. Are there scheduled vessels? Container carriers? They are. but they're on a pilot basis. We are still testing it. There's no schedule run. If there's no schedule run, how are you going to tell your customer when your containers are going to arrive? Nobody will use you, man. I come from operations, I ask these questions. I don't get the answers yet. But I realize that the challenges are there, and we have the capacity to overcome them. We do. Otherwise, all of us will not be sitting here. The third component is, of course, the digitization. Anyone knows how and who to contact when you want to move a container from Xi'an to Mersing? Who you contact? Who? Is there a platform that I can sign on, key my requirements, flag out a rate, and the computer tells you when your container is going to arrive, right in the flight schedule? There's no platform doing that. None. So do you take a risk when you use the middle corridor? Yes, you take a big risk. So if you have to take a big risk, will you use it? Compared to the Maritime Silk Road, where there are already systems in place to monitor, track, trace, and tell you when your containers are going to arrive. But all is not lost, because I know there are so many entities looking at this e-platform. There's the World Bank, there's OSCE, there's EU. Man, they're all looking at it. But they need to come together to create an integrated solution. I tried to do this. I talked to OSCE and EU and World Bank, and they came together, shared studies, and lo and behold, they came up with a concept called e-platform, a platform of platforms. That can work because it does not require you to develop your own systems at the same place. You put your custom systems, whether you're in Kazakhstan, I put my custom systems, I'm in Azerbaijan, okay? Put it in that platform. There's a router, there's intelligence in this, there's certain AI that picks out the information that you need and puts it to the next stage. But when you want to develop this, the question will be asked now, who's going to own this system? Where the information is going to reside to? Security issues. Who's going to benefit most from? Political issues. So, can it get done? Everybody stay back and look at each other. Oh man, too difficult, man. Let's put it at the next conference. So, I'm telling you from real life experience that I attended so many conferences. But because I see the vision, that's why I came to this country to work. I was picked up from my comfort zone and thrown to here in Singapore. I was from Singapore. Vice president, I had my staff working for me, everything was quick work, no challenges. I was bored. But here the challenges are great, but the rewards are even greater. Because once you can realize the vision, you'll be like the old days, the Silk Road. In the old days, Silk Road, Marco Polo had a wooden pass that allows him to traverse with escort once he showed this wooden pass. Next time, we have an electronic pass that allows us to pass through borders without stopping, because all the intelligence is there to figure out whether you're carrying anything illegal. This is what we need to do, a common vision of sorts. I can go on another hour, but I think I should stop.
That is a perfect ending because it takes me back to my beginning, which was the one voice of this regional mindset and this one vision. And I also wanted to marry that to the idea that this is not just a transit zone, but an area of its own investment. But I do have to remind people that we have some competition. You mentioned the Northern Corridor. We thought it was down. It may have been down a bit, but it's not out. It's reviving in the beginning of 2023. There is a trade surge that's happening between Russia, Central Asia, and China. There's quite a lot of activity. You can see e-commerce from Alibaba showing up in Liège. You see transport going through the Northern Corridor to Budapest. But there are signs that there is an interest in taking us in this direction, and I'd like to hear from you at what is going to drive this change. What trade drivers are going to make the difference? Because what's going to go into those containers is going to decide whether you're working on what part of your rail network. Who is going to be doing the buying in Europe? Is it going to be energy forever, even with the Green New Deal? Will that demand drop? No.
No new.
No new.
But there's a big difference
Okay.
between
All right.
the nomenclature. I would like to be clear.
All right.
European Green Deal.
I'm
That's it.
glad. I'm going to put you on the spot then on that, because I think there are tensions in the trade area that we have to be aware of. And this is including from sanctions, because there's a lot of intermediated trade. It's dropping from the West to Russia, but it's going in other channels. So we have to think in the real world of, as we've just heard from Eugene, of what it means to be on the ground, and if we're going to make investment decisions that have a long time frame, whether it's pipeline or rail or high-speed roll, or, changing gauges, these are expensive decisions for investors. So we have to have a vision then of where the region's going from a trade perspective. I'd like to ask each of you to just comment on what you think would be some, like we've heard a couple points here and there, but give me your top two drivers that is going to make the middle corridor put all of our heads behind it to make it work.
Shall I
Tamara,
start?
Yes, you may.
absolutely. Well, I think trade is definitely key. And so for the European Union, with the new, let's say, paradigm and that we find ourselves in, we needed to also redefine the way we do trade. We are very much invested in still in free trade agreements. And those indeed now cater more towards sustainability, labor, for instance, protections, towards critical raw materials, ESG standards. All those elements definitely drive, the challenges identified and then the vectors of how we're going to be delivering those, right? So trade is definitely a critical component. Another driver is the investments, again, the two-way investment between Europe and this region. For the European players to invest in this region, clearly what we need is the regulatory certainty. We need transparency, we need regulations, but we need also institutions. And I think that's also very key for, not only, the accession perspective of a number of countries in this region to the European Union, but also beyond that. Because I think we think in regional terms, in terms of what can we be doing, let's say, step by step. And the next step is indeed closer links. And the links between businesses on both sides are based on the, on the nature of whether you can do business safely. And I think that's the second driver that I identify.
Okay, and that's for getting the private sector involved, which everyone has been discussing here. Yes, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I guess I would offer that, when I think about what will animate the middle corridor going forward, and this may be overly simplistic, it's what we're already seeing driving the middle corridor now. It is the movement of raw materials, minerals, ores, energy resources. That will continue to be a driver. I guess I would offer in that context, and as we think about the European Green Deal and broader energy transitions that we're looking at and the shifts in global energy markets, we are going to also have to work with the region to make sure that the region is part of that transition as well. And then as new energy resources are brought online for and in the region, that is integrated as part of the middle corridor going forward, and building what we hope will be an infrastructure that is flexible and multimodal to be able to accommodate the development and evolution of the region's economy.
Excellent, thank you. Nathan?
In terms of commodities, you'd want to see, of course, the growth of basic commodities, ores, and that sort of thing. You'd also want to see more value-added goods as well. You'd want to see, for example, the resumption of the Uzbek auto industry, which had been growing and then it had a difficulty. So that would be one option for Uzbekistan to have more manufactured goods that could be exported. You also think about specialty agricultural goods, like non-GMO products from Kazakhstan, which is a major market that they're trying to export both to China and to Europe. And of course, if you think about the Caucasus, which produces tremendous amounts of specialty food and that sort of things that can be exported. And of course, they're very popular throughout the Soviet Union, but they're kind of unknown in Europe and other places. And so that would be another, we should think, dynamically about the types of products that could be containerized. It's not all just going to be electronics and that sort of thing. It could be a lot of things that you can containerize, but are not necessarily your traditional containerized goods. And you also have to think about the backhaul cargo, right? You're going to be sending containers one way, you have to be sending containers back the other way. And so one of the major constraints on growth and keeping, like Eugene said, keeping good ships in the route is that they have to have a balance of trade, both not just westbound towards Europe, but what are you going to send back? And so you have to think about, for example, what can Ukraine export back to Central Asia, and what sort of containerized goods and non-containerized goods could they be sending? So that, because these are, of course, private operators that are operating in the Caspian Sea, and so if their backhaul is empty, they're not going to be attracted to those routes. They're going to go to other routes. And so that's we need to be thinking about developing. Well, I think we're always thinking about, okay, how can we get from Asia to Europe? And we don't think about, okay, well, what about the other way? So we have to have a balance of cargo as well. So I know maybe Eugene, you can comment on that as well.
Yes.
Well, for me, I think you have to take a short-term and long-term horizon. The short-term is because when the war in Ukraine developed, fertilizer was affected. Ukraine produces lots of fertilizer, and the metal industry was affected also. So the replacement came from Kazakh, Turkmenistan, supplying fertilizer through the middle corridor. And Port Baku experienced phenomenal growth. Right? Last year we handled over 1 million tons of fertilizer passing through our port, and we're going to commission our fertilizer silos soon, in the next 2 or 3 months. The other one is your food, grain. Same logic. More grain needs to come from Central Asia out because of security reasons. And we see increasingly, and we see the potential, and so we are also building a grain terminal in Port Baku. But going forward, when let's say all the corridors, all the bottlenecks are solved, what are the products that are going to flow through in this phase? Then you talk about supply chains feeding your consumer markets, whether it's both ways in China or whether it is in Europe. Then you are linking up the industrial centers and the consumer markets. The industrial centers in China, and what are the products from these industrial centers? Obviously, there'll be high value-added products because you're going to pay higher rates. So if you're going to pay higher rates, it must be worth it to supply these goods. But from the other way around, it may not be from Europe to China, because the middle income people in China are coming en masse. They are growing. They have more money to spend. So you get certain, maybe special food from, let's say, UK, scones, which they don't make in China. And certain high middle income want to buy these scones. So they come high speed in 1 week, you have scones on the table, and these people like it. And they'll pay for it. So it's a demand and supply thing. But once you get those networks going, I can be sure that the markets will be created to fill those trains. Because they are reliable, they are efficient, and you know when your products are going to arrive. Not right now.
Okay, let me take you on that point, knowing when the goods are going to arrive, and I'm cognizant of our time. So we want one last question with some quick responses, okay? And then we can turn to the audience. To get the goods there on time and make this happen, give me your top 2 recommendations for those people in the audience who might have budgets that they're deciding how they're going to allocate for this middle corridor. What are the top 2 actions you would see to move this agenda? And in the process, would you expand the list of partners to include China as a strategic partner in development of the middle corridor? Dagmara, you're on the spot.
Always me, the first one. Well, I will maybe start with your last. I mean, clearly for us, China is a partner still, and rival, competitively on a number of fronts. And last but not least, of course, we want to manage this relationship, right? Like, it's important for us to de-risk this relationship, specifically with view to accelerating the energy transition, right? So I think investments that will involve China are going to be simply scrutinized against that perspective. And I don't know if this group has been aware, but of course the Green Deal Industrial Strategy, which came out earlier this year, followed by a number of acts, the Net Zero Industry Act, for instance, the Critical Raw Materials Act, they all show that while Europe does not want to decouple, we also feel that, friendshoring, for instance, is something that we will invest ourselves more in. But of course, we also will invest, into building our capacity domestically. And I think if there could be two ways, trades and 2 ways, technology transfers, but also opportunities to basically, if you see that from that perspective, that Europe wants to build partnerships, build resilience through partnerships, but we also want to build within the European Union. So investments are welcome within the European Union with view to really those challenges that I've identified earlier.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Michael?
I guess in terms of the two areas, if I have to pick and choose just 2, customs harmonization and then efficiency of transfers through digitization. And I think from our perspective, those are 2 areas where there is significant opportunity for technical assistance that can help to make trade more cost-effective, in so doing to make it more competitive, and in being more competitive to make the middle corridor a viable proposition. So those would be the 2. On the PRC question, I guess I would offer that really this is a question of Beijing's behavior. We find ourselves now in this new era of strategic competition because of the choices that Beijing has consistently been making over the past several decades. They have been welcomed into the international economy, welcomed into the international trade system, and unfortunately they have chosen to act in ways that have exploited that welcome and served to flout and undermine the system that has created global shared prosperity and progress over the past many, many decades. And so I would offer in Central Asia and the Caucasus as elsewhere, if Beijing wants to participate into the creation of a rules-based order and open architecture that leads to economic growth and prosperity that is beneficial for all, great. If they choose a more narrowly self-interested approach, and if they choose to continue to violate international institutions' rules and norms of behavior, then that unfortunately puts us in a different place.
Okay, that's clear. Nathan?
Well, I mean, I think China is essential. We have to be able to find a way to engage with China. I mean, this is the Silk Road is Xi Jinping's sort of central focal idea that he keeps going back to, and so they want this to work, and we have to find a way for it to work. You know, it's unthinkable without China being involved in some form or fashion, and we have to think about how to do that. It might not be easy, but we have to find a way to do it. And in terms of investment priorities, we've already talked about digitization, so I would also add to that. I think we do need to think about vessels, because I think, again, the vessels are kind of sometimes retrofitted vessels that weren't originally designed to handle the type of commerce that they're using. That's one way to get Turkmenistan a little bit more involved, because they want to build vessels. And it's a way to sort of have demonstrations for maybe types of vessels that are newer. You can kind of flip the script. Because they're so old, you can maybe skip a generation and go to, you know, alternative fuel vessels or something like that, natural gas or CNG or LNG powered vessels that would, again, make it a very green corridor as well. And you could also insist that the vessels that are used for those Black Sea routes are not the old, you know, junkers or whatever, right? Because as container vessels have gotten larger, it tends to be the shallow draft vessels. The smaller vessels tend to be the oldest ones, right? And so these routes, if they don't have a huge ports and they don't have a lot of draft, they tend to get the oldest vessels assigned. We need to kind of flip that, the same way that they've done with like the harbor trucks, or now the cleanest trucks, because if you're going to be going to the Port of Los Angeles, you need to have the newest truck. You need to have a similar sort of situations. Like if you're going to be handling this Black Sea route, you need to insist that you're using an efficient new vessel, even if it's not the traditional role.
So another climate angle.
Yeah.
Another climate angle. Okay, quickly, your top two out
Well,
of your
the
long
top two-
list, just your top two. We've had an infrastructure recommendation and a soft infrastructure, hard and soft.
Well, the top two is going back to my discussions on having a enhanced road network system and debottlenecking all the current issues, whether it's in Altinko, whether it is in Akahaki, and from there also looking at the real issues when you want to take from the border of Georgia and Turkey all the way to Europe through the Marmara Tunnel. Create a single so-called rail line dedicated to containers. Hard to do because there are not much volumes to justify that, but in the long term, it's a chicken and egg thing. The second thing is to create an e-platform so that all the information of how, when, who to contact in using this middle corridor network system is there. You can track and trace, you can submit all your customs documentation, whether it's your SGMS, whether it's your CIM, whether it's OTIF, you put it there, the system registers it and takes out all the key information to transfer it to the other side with whatever system they use. You need intelligent APIs to do this. Complicated system, but once it's there, it will facilitate border transactions, it will facilitate trade, commercial-wise.
Thank you very much. That brings us to a consensus, I think, on digitalization. So I think we're all behind that one. And I will note that among the agreements signed between China and Kazakhstan, there was some Chinese support for digitalization, if I'm not mistaken. Do we have time for a few questions from the floor? If we have a rolling microphone? Anybody? I think you have someone behind you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking time speaking with us today. Kind of jumping on this question of potential investments or what might be as a path forward for private industry, private companies looking to invest in the middle corridor. I know, Dr. Huston, you mentioned it beyond just energy and infrastructure, other sort of industries. I'm wondering what those industries might be that are poised to be invested in for either capital companies or other companies looking to enter the Central Asian and that region essentially.
The companies that need to see investment in Central Asia to take advantage of this? This is
Not necessarily specific companies within Central Asia, but industries, whether that might be manufacturing, banking, whatever, outside of essentially just Middle Corridor as a as a transitory path, what industries in Central Asia, within Kazakhstan, within Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, that might benefit both the domestic economy, the domestic industry, as well as any potential investor.
Thank you. And so one, there's been a lot of industrial relocation of Russian capital from Russia to Kazakhstan, to a lesser extent to Uzbekistan and others. And so how to use that going forward? You know, there's been a lot of sort of relocation of industrial capacity, and as entities try to, avoid sanctions by moving down. So obviously you don't want them to be taking advantage of avoiding sanctions, but there is a sort of reorientation where we might see Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan take some of the role that Russia had done historically. So that might be a way of developing some of those industries where there had been clusters on both sides. I'd already mentioned auto parts, I think, or an auto industry. I think that's another major source, particularly for Uzbekistan, because of course Uzbekistan has a huge working age population. I mean, if you look at the demographic profiles in the population pyramid, you need to create a whole lot of jobs in Uzbekistan every year. And so a significant percentage of those have to be manufacturing jobs. So if you're looking at sort of consumer good production, that would be where you would mainly be oriented. I don't know, Eugene, you had something?
Yeah. Following that, I think the other investments you can potentially look at is the chemical industry, right? Once you see the fat for fertilizer drops down because there are alternative supply from other countries feeding in, you find that Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan will look into more higher value cargo into the chemical industry to use their fossil fuel to generate chemical products that can sell for higher value.
Okay. Any other questions? I think someone's here.
Hi, thank you very much for your speech. It was quite interesting. And while Mr. Eugene was talking, I had a question, and which I wrote. Some of the countries on the Middle Corridor have conservative customs policies, and they are not part of integrated economic organizations such as EU or Eurasia Economic Union. And what are the possible impacts on the issue on the realization of Middle Corridor project? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that also pertains to your point about the free trade, right? Don't mean to jump on you first, but we can also go back to Eugene.
I mean, I think customs are key, right? We see in our relation to Turkey that we benefited both Turkey as well as the European Union. So the custom liberalization is really amazing in terms of sparing more trade. So indeed, as much as you can align the customs regimes or make them compatible, this is going to be quite a development that will support growth and trade.
And this puts our two government representatives here in the driver's seat, really, because you are in a position to you have the convening power.
Yes.
Right. The United States and the EU should hopefully have a platform to be able to enable this to be more uniformed, right?
Yeah, no, and we are seeking to work with our partners in the region on customs harmonization. I mean, it is, for all the reasons already discussed, I mean, it is tremendously important to get that right, to be able to then unleash the potential that might otherwise remain blocked and dormant.
Good. Very good point. Thank you. Did you want to add anything? I think, no. Okay, good. I think we're right at the end of our time, and it seems that we're at the end of our questions. So thank you all for your attention, and it was a pleasure to hear all of you speak. I've learned a lot myself.